Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Oh, do, re, mi. Hey folks, it's Peter again, and today I thought I'd go over how speakers are made. And so real briefly, this is a crossover, and crossover is installed in a box, and then you fill these holes that you see right there and there with drivers like that, and then you plug it into your amplifier and it makes noise. Amazing, huh? So this is a little bit of a prologue to the longest video I have ever made, and I don't know what to say, folks. I always think at the beginning of videos I'm going to make something shorter, and it turns out in this case it was even longer. And what it's about is flocking. I flocked this design you see on there, I flocked the interior of this, and I flocked that. And in order to make it a little more watchable, I thought maybe it would be helpful if I put the timestamps for the different. So I did this first, I did these second, I did these last, and those timestamps will be in the video description. So it was kind of logical stopping points if you don't want to digest it all in one big gulp. It's big, it's really big, and it's the best way I could figure out to do it. Another thing I wanted to kind of show off here, and that is this crossover that was assembled by Elon at Easy's Crossovers, and he's providing a service of crossover assembly to the DIY community, and just does really, really nice work. I don't know how well that shows up on the camera, but really clean, nice layout. I mean, it's going to be inside a box, so pretty isn't everything, but he does nice work. It's thoughtful and well considered. So if you're looking for someone to do that assembly for you, I'm going to plug him. And no, he didn't pay me or anything like that. This is just me trying to help out the DIY community. And right after this segment, there'll be some photos of this, and then on to the epic flocking video. So if you're interested in learning how to flock, stay tuned. We'll call that good. Hello again, internet people, internet speaker builders, and anybody who likes the idea of flocking. I know. It sounds like it could be something else, and maybe even innuendo, but it's not. So what I'm going to do is show you how I did this, which is flocking. And there's flocking on these. These are actually grooves. It may not be obvious to the camera, but I actually routed some grooves in these. And these are, I should probably tell you a little about what these speakers are. These are a pair of NX Studio monitors, GR Research design. These are cut by Jay McCormick up in British Columbia. And these are the old style, and I've had them for a long time, just never got around to building them. And I decided to modify them pretty significantly. And the modifications are basically I added an inch to the bottom. I also added a recess to the bottom that matches a speaker stand that I got from Monoprice. So these will actually, and there's a right there where my finger is, there is a threaded fastener in there. So these will actually attach to the speaker stands when I'm done. I also did some modifications up here on the top, took away the round over, made these bevels, but that's really not what I'm here to talk about. So they are what they are, probably not easily duplicatable because the tweeter and the woofer have been moved up in this design, so this space up here doesn't exist anymore. Enough about that. I did 3 areas of flocking on this, and one thing I probably need to tell you about flocking is it's not something you can rush. If you try and go fast, I guarantee you something about it will surprise you. And I did this in 3 separate sessions, and they were about a day apart. So one of them, actually, I guess I should take that back, 4 different sessions. I did each side, and then this stripe. They're not stripes, they're grooves. And then I also did this top area. And once I put this stuff on, I don't want to mess with it because you stick your finger in it or do anything to it before the fibers have a chance to set in the glue. There's a real risk that something will happen, and it's pretty easy to put on, but it's not easy to repair. So, and it's durable. I mean, it's not fragile when it's done. So, and part of my thing with these particular speakers is I sort of like this area up here to look different than the rest of the speaker. So I did one in bright red, and I had a customer send me some pictures of one he did, and he did a kind of a bright aqua color in here. Just add some visual interest, and I'm all about that part of it. So, and then I used no-seam netting on the grills, and these are actually grills I made. And then put a magnet in there. That's a refrigerator magnet. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to flock the interior of this, do these designs on the sides, and then also those grooves. And I should kind of show you what's going on here. The reason I didn't flock the bottom is because that is a piece of no-res that I'll stick in once I get the tweeter installed. So that's what that'll look like when I'm trying to tip that, so maybe the camera gets a better view. That's what that'll look like when it's completed. So let's set some of this aside. And there you can see how that magnet works. Kind of a slick way to do things. And show you what's needed for flocking, and there's probably some options here, but so let's talk about what is it exactly. I think this is nylon fiber. I think they might make it in 2 different types. I think there's nylon and rayon, and one of them is more weather resistant and sunlight resistant. I think if, let's say, so places that you wouldn't imagine this stuff is used. People who build duck decoys, especially decorative ones, not necessarily something you're going to go out and hunt ducks with, use flocking. Model railroad and that kind of, they use it to make it look like grass. It's really kind of interesting stuff, but it's all done in the same way, and it has this kind of fuzzy nature to it. The place where many people have probably seen it is inside of jewelry boxes or something like that, or display cases. What looks like velvet or felt is often actually flocking. So this is the fibers. They come in bags. You can get, I think these are large bags. Smaller bags are like that. And I think this is in fact, I haven't used any out of this bag. So that's what I think that's a 1 pound bag. And as always, I'll link all this stuff in the description, so you can get right to Flocket's website and you can kind of look at some of this stuff. And some of what I have here is no longer available because some of this is, like, no joke, 35 years old. And So that's the fiber. And then to apply flocking, you use this stuff, which is, I don't know what they actually call it. They call it undercoat adhesive. And my off-the-cuff assessment is that this is fairly thick. It's oil-based. I can tell that by the smell. And it also dries really slow, like some varnishes and stuff like that. So this adhesive paints on. Most people are probably going to use a brush to apply it. I've actually sprayed it a time or two. And so this goes on where you want the flocking. You want to keep it off of where you don't want it, because this was what this blows into. And you can blow it on, you can pour it on, you can shake it on, you can apply it in a lot of different ways. It's kind of a non-specific process, although there's one part of it that I'll show you that I do a little bit differently, but we'll get to that. And so adhesive goes on, the fibers go in, leave it alone for 24 hours, then you can pull off masking tape or whatever else you've got. Handling it before that, I'd suggest you don't do that. So this is an old-timey applicator. For any of you old, my age or similar, you might recognize this thing. Years and years ago, before, I don't know, spray cans were more, I don't know but I remember seeing these. You'd put like insecticide in it and dust your roses or something. And I'm pretty sure that's pretty much the same thing. It might be modified a little bit, but this pumps and the flocking comes kind of puffing out here. It doesn't shoot out. It's not like high velocity. And also masking tape. Obviously, I don't want it where I don't want it. And so masking tape. And two things maybe I should cover about masking tape. People assume that all masking tape is the same, and I can tell you that this stuff is automotive paint masking, and the difference between this and the blue stuff you get at the home centers or at paint stores and stuff like that is the glue on this is solvent resistant. So if you're using, I don't think oil base is a big deal, but when you get into hot solvents that use lacquer thinner as a base, they will just turn the adhesive on blue masking tape to mush, and they're not designed to handle that kind of solvent. And so what happens is the areas you mask off get lots of creep, and it's just a mess. So most of what I use whenever I'm doing stuff like this is going to be automotive masking tape. You get this at automotive supply stores. I don't think you find it at anywhere else. So there's one difference in masking tape. If you wonder why your blue masking tape isn't performing very well, it could be because you're using it for something that wasn't intended to be used for. This is a different kind of masking tape. This is, well, I can tell you what the manufacturer called it. Well, they actually call it Pro Band Fine Line. I've always known this as Fine Line tape, which I think was a 3M creation. And it's not like, so this stuff is a paper base, and I think they call it a crepe paper. It's got that kind of ridged feel to it. This stuff, on the other hand, is, I think it's probably vinyl. I don't really say on there what it is, but fine line masking tape is what you'd use if you were taping off a car, putting a stripe or something on it, and you want a really crisp edge. Masking tape isn't very good at that, conventional masking tape. But fine line tape, because it's not paper, it's not absorptive at all, and you can pull it into shape, so you can kind of stretch it and pull it. If you've ever watched videos of guys doing flames on cars or something like that, they'll pull the roll and they'll kind of snake it around. And this kind of tape does that really well because it deforms and conforms to contours and things like that Regular masking tape, not so much. So I'm going to use that. I'll show you where. I like it, and I use it when I want a crisp edge. And so I'm going to mask off this first with this, and then this. And what else we got here? You know what? I think that covers it for now. So next thing I'm going to do is, one more thing. So this pattern, you may recognize that. I don't know how well the camera's going to show that up. But that design that you see on the side of this is a design that I subscribe to a site online that offers photographs and illustrations and all sorts of interesting patterns, I guess you would say, or things. I mean, you just go there if you wanted canned stuff, and it's you pay for it on a subscription, so anything you use is royalty free. It's not somebody's intellectual property, and that you can maybe see it through there. So you've got two things going on here. This is I took this pattern and I refined it. It was kind of rough. And so now I have this digitized, and I can expand it, I can contract it, I can orient it, I can modify it. And I've just always thought it was a pretty pattern, and I've used it in a number of different places. And what I do is I take this design, I size it the way I want it, and then I send it to a local sign shop, and they do all kinds of stuff. I mean, like real estate signs, you name it, they do it. It's a Signs Now, which I think is a franchise, and I send them an EPS file, which I can export from my CAD program, and they'll cut this. And so I get them like this. It's got a backer. So you can kind of see there, it's got a backer and a release sheet. And I'll be applying that on the side as, and I should tell you, it's what they call low-tack vinyl, which means it doesn't have a real high adhesive, which you'd want if you were doing a sign, especially a sign outside. But in this case, I'm just using it as a masking shield, I guess you'd say. So the areas that are not masked off here will get flocking. The areas that are outside of that obviously won't. So there's where we're going. And and this thing is a yoga mat. Yoga mats have become a part of my woodworking tooling, because they're available. I think I got the first one at a yard sale, and then later on I ran across a roll of this stuff that someone who taught yoga was kind of getting rid of because they no longer taught classes, and I guess they used to sell it by the piece to their students, and I bought a roll of it. So it's kind of foamy. I don't know what kind of foam, but it works good for protecting finishes if I'm rolling them around, which you'll see. I do roll them around. So let's button this up for now, and I'll get set up, and we'll actually do some masking and some flocking. I'm gonna shoot some of this with my head cam, and hopefully I can kind of intersperse that so you can get a closer look at what I'm doing. So I'll catch up with you in a little bit. All right. When will we stand here with speakers? Okay, a little further down the road, and the first thing I'm going to do is mask this off, and I want the color to stop right in the corner of where the vertical side meets the horizontal. So, and actually in this area right here, I'm going to run it a little wild because the no-res will actually cover that up. So the easiest way to do that is not to have them butt into each other, but have them overlap. So that gives a nice clean edge there. So I want to mask that off. I'm going to use fine line tape, and then I'll put some more masking down in here. This isn't really critical because in this case I'm going to put the no-res in there, so it's actually going to be covered up about 1 inch high. And then the other area that I want to make sure and mask off is the area where the tweeter mounts. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my head cam on and do this with head cam and probably sped up. This is really well planned, you can tell. I'll speed it up, but I'll try and show detail of what I'm doing in there. The critical part of this, and I found out when I did that one, is these corners. You want to make sure and get that, those inside corners, the adhesive will want to creep under the tape there, and I actually had to clean that up a little bit. And I'll get to that. If it happens on this one, I'll show you how I cleaned it up. And so I'm going to get going on this with head cam, and we'll, oh, maybe I should talk about one other thing. You know what? Never mind. Okay, so here we are, and I'm using the GoPro mic, so if it sounds a little different, that's because the microphone is different. But hopefully this perspective will give you a better idea what I'm doing. So my idea here, and what I did on the other one, was to get this tape right down in the intersection between the vertical and the horizontal edge. And that might seem easy, but this tape is not, it doesn't really have any stiffness to it. So it sort of goes where you point it. And that's what it's designed to do. But the key, so right here, I want to make sure that I get that tape right into the corner, nice and tight. And that will give me the tightest seal I can get when I paint this, because I'm going to be painting this surface right here with the glue. And I don't want it to sneak under this. And this tape is actually designed for not letting paint underneath it, so it works pretty well. And the only places I know where you can get fine line tape is automotive paint stores, or I'm sure there's online sources too. I have a local store that I get all this stuff from. And I think Fine Line was actually a 3M brand name at one time, but this tape in particular is made by somebody else, FBS. But it's usually in an area of the store where it's kind of all by itself, and so it's obvious when you're looking at Fine Line tapes. There's different widths, different colors usually from manufacturers. I think 3M tape is blue typically, but actually I'm using this on the recommendation of one of the people in the store. They said they liked it better than the 3M tape. So there I'm careful to get it into the corner. As I come around the corner, the tendency is going to be for this to rise and go uphill that direction. So you kind of have to counteract that. I'm working on the yoga mat right now, so this speaker is finished except for this, so I don't want to scratch it up. You can often find yoga mats at yard sales. People who don't practice yoga anymore, I guess. Now you can see when you look at that, that's actually a little crooked, and I'm going to fix that. And the way I'm going to fix that is get started at this other end and pull it down just a smidgen. And I'm using this putty knife to actually hold that in place, so it's acting like an auxiliary finger. And you can use it to sort of set the tape down and guide it along. I found in tight areas like this, the finger's just too fat and clumsy to do that kind of work. And I do want that to be a crisp corner. So the same thing, round and round here. This is the only real critical area, what I'd call critical, and that might be me, but real visible area. So I'm careful to kind of align that, push that tape right into the corner, One thing interesting about masking tape in general is you can kind of bow it different directions by the way you pull on it. So you'll notice I still have the roll attached here. And that came around the corner. I want to make sure that's nice and crisp. Now I'm not trying to damage the tape. I just want to push on it real gently there. And then from the corner I can take off down this long side. And here, maybe I can demonstrate that. So I don't know if that's real evident. So I'm bowing that tape. And I can go the other direction too. I mean, I can bow it down by pulling it this way. And the key usually is that if you want straight and not necessarily straight, but even lines with curves that aren't herky-jerky, you kind of pull a little tension into the tape. And there you can see how that went uphill there. Now, obviously, that's not something I want to do. So I pull it back, and I use my knife to sort of guide it. And there I went actually downhill. This is definitely something you get a feel for. It's maybe not intuitive, but worth the time spent at this stage of the game, I think. And then we'll just overlap the tape at the end here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that now. And there you can see I actually drug it down a little too much, so it's coming out on the edge. And you just kind of pull it back to where it's not like that. And then work it around the corner. And because it's such a high contrast between the orange and the black in this case, it's actually gray, but it looks black, I imagine, on the camera. You can look at that and say, well, that's got a bow, or that's something I don't want. Now the top edge doesn't really matter. The only real concern here is taping off where you want that crisp line, because that's going to be really visible when you pull the grill out. Now obviously it's not going to be visible when the grill's on. But in my mind, neatness counts. So there's two other areas. I want to mask off this area where the tweeter flange rests. The tweeter will cover that. So I'm actually going to mask through these inserts from corner to corner. It won't be visible in any way, so it's not really critical. But, and I'll use regular masking tape for that. Well, when I say regular masking tape, I mean Automotive masking tape. And I already covered that a little bit earlier. All masking tape is not the same. This is a little easier to work in a situation like this, partly because it's wider. And the way I'll do something like this is I'll go ahead and run long, and they'll actually define the edge with another piece of masking tape. And I don't know how easy that's going to be to see down in there because it's so dark. But what I'm doing is running that tape corner to corner on the inserts. Now those are threaded inserts I installed, and I'm just splitting them in half in terms of, you know what, I just had a thought, that's probably not the best way to do it. I don't really want to get glue down in those holes where the threads are, so I'm actually going to mask to the bottoms of the holes and the tops of the holes, the outsides of the holes, let's put it that way. And I'm going to pull this off and redo it up here. And the tweeter itself covers all this, so this is sort of hair splitting and not critical. But you don't want to, I don't think you'd want to get what am I trying to say? The adhesive in there. And now I'm just kind of pressing that on so I can see where those inserts are. Now, if you just have holes in yours, it might be a little different, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. Obviously, this can be used a lot of different ways. And what I'll do in this case is I'll take my my razor blade, wherever it went. Well, it seemed to have lost. Oh, there it is. And I'll make one square edge like that. And that way I can overlap that tape at the bottom and this cut it at the top. Oh, I'm doing it on the wrong side. Don't make the mistakes I make. Trying to save you from those. So that bottom you can see, and it can land anywhere on there. It doesn't really matter if it's at the bottom, which I got pretty close there, but that wasn't anything more than luck. And then you just pull that tape like that. And that gives you a straight edge for the other side. Because I've got tape covering those holes already, there's no risk of getting the adhesive down in them. And then again, I just put my blade up there and pull along like that, so I just shear that tape off. And then on the vertical sides, you can just line up with the tape you've already put on there, and then just use that as your guide. So pull up like that. This is going to be hard to see. It's hard for me to see, and I don't have. Let's try this again. So there's another way. I think I'll show you. You can pull the blade up against that other tape and kind of give it a little pressure and push it through the tape below. Let's see if I got it here. I may not have. Let's try that again. Okay, you can kind of hear it snap when it gets through the tape. I mean, it's not really a snap, but it does make a noise when it pushes through there. And you'll see that actually tore a little bit right there. Not a big deal because it's all going to be covered. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I'm going to pull my knife up against there, and then I'm going to kind of straighten it out and just push on it. And it might seem kind of weird, but you can feel it when that kind of goes through the tape. And then to just mask off the rest of that. There's probably not a huge need to do this, but I look at it and say, I'm here, the tape's here, better to do it and not wish I had done it later. And the way that could manifest is if you had a drip of glue or something go through into that waveguide, which again, these are completely finished, so something like that it wouldn't be an impossible thing to unwind, but it's just something that there's no real need to, so. You can see this can be pretty sloppy. Not that I'd want to do anything sloppy, but there are some areas that just aren't critical. So I just make sure all that tape's stuck down and it'll be fine. If you got a little paint creep underneath there, it wouldn't be a big deal. It's just not going to be seen. And then the other area I want to mask, and I'll show you over here on this one. So you can see I went right down to the bottom here and across the bottom there. So I'll do this one the same. There's a couple different ways you could do it. So do it however you like, I guess, is what I'm saying. I'm gonna fast forward through this part because it's pretty self-explanatory. On this part, I am slowing down a little bit to show you. Now the no-res will actually, and this is just this particular design, but it's a way that you can make what looks like a pretty crisp line without having to go to any big, what I want to say, trouble as far as where the two things meet. Because I'm going to overlap the no-res in this area onto the flocking. So the other thing I'll kind of call out here is make sure I press that all down. As a little bit of a insurance, you can tape a little bit more on here, and that way if you get wild with your brush, you don't get paint where you don't want it. Like I said, once you put the flocking on, you just want to walk away for a while. And so I'm going to fast forward through this too. All right, next step here is to run a little tape around here. Using a brush is real easy to go over the tape line, and I just want to, because I can mask this off, so you're just masking right on top of that other tape. It doesn't have to be pretty, and it just needs to land somewhere in the middle of that other tape. Just a little insurance. And there you can see I've actually done something I don't want to do, and that is to kind of round that corner out. The adhesive could go under that and get where I don't want it. So I'm actually going to kind of push that in with my putty knife. Ideally, I'd tear the tape, and I did. And then I can just overlap that. Again, this isn't forming the line. This is just keeping you from getting excess where you don't want it. And I just did the same thing again. So let's try that one more time. Use my putty knife, go into the corner. All right. Now when I use a brush in there, I have some overrun space where it's not gonna be critical. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna touch sand all this with a Scotch-Brite. Red Scotch-Brite. That will look kind of like that, but not quite. I just need a little square of it. Coming back. So I'm just scuffing that up a little bit so that the paint has some tooth. I don't know how critical this is, but it's almost always a good idea not to assume that any paint is going to stick to something that is not been abraded a little bit. I don't know how better to say that. It doesn't need to be, we're not talking about sanding it like crazy. We're just talking about putting some scratches in it. And I'm pushing that up into the corner so I make sure and scratch clear into the corner there. Okay, so there's the top edge, and I'll do this. And then the rest of this. And you don't need to worry about sanding scratches because you're going to fill them all up. I mean, you can go any way you want here. If you were finishing your car, it'd be more of a big deal, but. Okay, there it is, all masked and prepped. Well, to have one good look around because you won't get a second chance at this. I mean, once this stuff is applied, I've never tried to take it off, but it would certainly be messy. And so Don't do that. Okay, here we are, head cam, ready to, well, actually, we're not ready for that part. Sorry. If I get a little out of order here, it's because I'm trying to do a lot of things at once. So we're going to open the, not only trying to do them, I'm trying to plan them beforehand. So the editing of videos I found is a lot easier if it's sort of lineal. So this isn't going to be quite like painting your wall. I start real with a small amount of paint. I mean, the idea in the end is to get it evenly coated with a light coat. You don't want it so thin that it doesn't have some depth to it, but you want to get it on there to where it's gonna glue the fibers in, if that makes sense. So if I got excess on the brush, I usually kind of brush it off somewhere where I'm gonna brush it out. So this area up here, I wanna make sure that I don't just put gobs and gobs. The bigger gobs of paint you get, the more it's gonna wanna get under your masking tape. And this area is an area I wanna keep pretty clean. Crisp, maybe, is a better word. And you can see why. Now this brush is actually a little bigger than I need. This was the smallest one they had when I went to buy a brush. So, but you can see there, if I had not had that taped off, I would have had sizing where I didn't want it. And I should probably mention something else here. I said sizing, I didn't mean sizing. I meant glue. Adhesive, I think they call it. Wherever there's adhesive, the fibers will stick, and there's nothing that you can do to unwind that, except let it dry and maybe clean it off. So I would encourage you to bear that in mind. And there is no need for speed here. This stuff dries so slow. In fact, one thing I might recommend that I've done is I take a little dab of this adhesive and I put it on something and just set it aside, just a scrap of anything. Probably not paper. You want something that won't absorb it. But what that does is give you a reference for when it's dry. And I think it'd surprise most people to find out that 2 or 3 hours later, this stuff is still really tacky. And that's the way it's supposed to be. But it also makes it really forgiving. But the flip side of that coin is you can't expect it to be ready to pull masking off in a couple of hours. I would definitely wait overnight. And there's no real risk there because it's so slow to dry that you're not risking letting it get too dry. And that's where I use, and it can be something as simple as this. Just put a daub somewhere, and now that's your reference. And I'm actually going to lay this down. And you can see what happens right there. When you get it too thick, you're going to get runs, and that's not good. And especially you don't want to get runs next to masking tape, although this area will all be hidden. So the way paint, and this to me is just like painting with oil-based paint, and that might be, I don't know if there's anything special about it, but it acts just like old-timey oil-based paint that you paint the woodwork with in the house. And so I get it on there. I don't really care about spreading it out. I just want to get the whole surface wetted and then brush it out. So that kind of applies to everything here. So I'm going to do this all at once, and then we'll move on to, you want to be careful. Now I'm going to lay this down because it's just a little easier to work on that surface. And also I got a window behind me, which lights that up really nice. And you'll have to take my word for it. There really is a window behind me. So you can see I'm not being too fussy about how I apply it. I just don't want to get it places that I don't want the flocking itself. Now you can kind of see where the yoga mats, and it doesn't have to be a yoga mat. I mean, it can be a towel or anything, but if your speakers are finished, you probably don't want to be rolling them around and manipulate them. And so I don't know if that's real evident right there, but you can see the brush strokes down here. That's what I'd call a nice wet coat. A little thin up here, and there's a little bit of stuff that I don't want in there. Give me a second. So I wanted to get a paper towel, so I didn't have it on my fingers. And for this go around, so I'll kind of do this in 2 stages. I'll get it all covered, and you want to be sure you don't have paint on your fingers when you go to move the speaker around. Unless you want fingerprints all over your speaker, I guess you can. Maybe that might be kind of an interesting finish in and of itself. But so for me, this is sort of familiar. I mean, years ago, before latex paint sort of took over the home painting world, oil-based paint was what you painted trim with. And yeah, something kind of weird in that brush. So everything about this, the way it goes on and the way it smells and everything is kind of familiar to me. The cool thing about, and this really doesn't apply here, I mean, you don't care if it flows out because you're going to cover it all up with fiber anyway, but oil-based paint in general takes a long time to do what they call flow out. And I'm going to show you something here that I goofed up a little on. I didn't quite get those holes covered, and I wish I would have, but it's kind of late to turn back now. So now that I've got everything covered, I'm going to brush it out in longer strokes and make sure I've got nice even coverage. In places where it's a little dry, I'll add a little, and what I want to do is spread around what I've got on there all over the whole thing. And I'm going to have to worry about those holes later. I can run a tap through there. Those are threaded. They're number 440 screws. And here's another thing that happens with paint is you can see that buildup right there in a corner. It's not a big deal. I mean, I wouldn't sweat a bullet over it, but if you can avoid it, it's better to avoid it. So a wet enough coat to where you're going to get some fiber stuck in there. And by brushing these long strokes, you kind of spread it around more evenly. It's another reason I like to lay it down, because I can just see it better. Old eyes and all that, you know. And corners are another area where you want to make sure and not get too thin. Speed is definitely not of the essence in this process, but keeping your fingers out of the paint is. And here you can really see, so there's thin areas, there's thin areas. This is actually pretty good right through here. And there's another, here I was telling you how these brushes don't shed. Well, this one evidently does. This is my second go around with this brush because I did the other speaker. So here I'm just getting some bulk paint on. I call it paint, adhesive. I'll try and do better. Just so I can kind of get it spread around, replace it needs to be, and then I brush it out. And by brushing it out, I mean getting it evenly coating this entire surface. And there's some kind of something in the paint, you can see it right there. I'm not gonna add the adhesive. I'm not sure what it is. I don't think it was on the brush, but it might have been, so I guess make sure your brush is clean. It's not gonna be a problem in this case. If you were painting grandma's rocker, it might be a thing to be concerned about. And then the last thing I want to do is kind of drag the brush, big long strokes, and that helps to evenly distribute that. And I hope that shows through in the head cam. I forget that the perspective, and this is a good area to make sure you don't have paint on your fingers, is not exactly through my eyes. It's the perspective is above my eyes. So hopefully I'm getting, and there you can see thin there. I'm not flipping you off. I apologize if it seemed like it. So I want to get more paint in there. And because this takes so long to dry, the next step will be loading the flocking gun and getting it on here. Even if that were 10 or 15 minutes down the road, it wouldn't be a big deal if you had this coated well. You don't want to skin over, but it stays shiny and wet like this for quite some time. There you can see what I'm talking about, maybe in that corner. So it's easy to get corner buildup. And probably not going to be a visual thing, but it will be a drying thing. The thicker the paint is, the longer it will take to dry. And your gauge for that isn't going to be looking at this. It's really going to be looking at that sample. You won't be able to see any of this, and you'll see why. I mean, I'm going to spray flocking all over this. It'll look like I'm putting way too much on. But I kind of... You just really can't overdo it. What happens if you get more than enough on there, it just sits there. And then when you go to, in this case, unmask it, you just shake it off into something that you can collect it in. And it really, there's no downside to putting too much on it. You better have enough. It's sort of self-rights, if that makes sense. Any sailors out there will know what that means. Okay, so there you can see, finish up with some long strokes. And I've still got some to do here. Not much. But anywhere it's too thin will not grab onto those fibers like you want. And oil-based paint does, adhesive in this case, does tighten up when it dries. I don't know how better to put that. You can get a feel for what I'm talking about if you put a blob like that somewhere, and it gets, I don't know that it shrinks all that much, but it tightens up. Best way I can put it. Okay, so I think I've got all the surfaces, and dragging slowly on there is probably better than stroking really fast. But you can see how that is right there. You can also see that thing I just pulled out, but you can see how that is flowing out, maybe better over here. So even though I tried to get it even, I still notice over here, and good light is probably important at this stage, and I especially appreciate it because I got 66-year-old eyes, but the old thing, you can't have too much light, well, that applies here. So given a little time, you can see the brush strokes kind of just disappear, and it turns into a more even coat, even looking coat. Now I'm going to tip this up, and I want to make sure and get this area, this is where the grill will sit, and I don't want it to be thinner than the rest. And because of the lighting where I am, this is just easier to do this way. But so I want to get an even coat. I want it to flow out. And that's a painting term for any of you guys, people out there who paint. Flow out is an often called out phenomenon. I mean, that's how paint goes on one way or another, and then it flows out, meaning it sort of flattens out. And So I'm making sure I've got that nice and evenly coated. I'm paying particular attention to this because on the other one, I think I actually got this a little thin right here, and it looks less fuzzy when you do that. You're looking through to the color of this paint or the paint itself as opposed to being completely covered in fibers. It's actually pretty hard to see, and it's me fussing over little details probably. But I imagine you wouldn't be here watching me do this if you didn't like watching people fuss over small details. So again, I mean, you can see nothing really fantastic about my paint job there. And now we will press on. There you can get a better view, and I'm gonna pick that out just because it's bugging me. That bristle. I should have paid more attention to cleaning that brush. And by the way, that it'll be cleaned in paint thinner because it's oil base. So I'll see if we can fix my bug tracks there. Oh shoot, I didn't get it. Watch me fuss. Oh, brother. If you don't like the idea of paint on your fingers, a pair of rubber gloves might be a good idea. Finally, got it. Now here, I'm just gonna kind of let this flow out as you're watching it here. So I'm gonna drag my brush slowly over the whole thing, evenly distribute paint. And in just seconds, that will start to flatten out. I'm adding just a little in there. This is, I guess, a case where more isn't better. It's like the three bears, you know. You can have too little, you can have too much, but what you want is in the middle somewhere. And now you can see it's doing what's called dragging, which it's new paint on top of old paint that I had on there, and it gets kind of grabby, for lack of a better term. So we're gonna move on here. Set your paint aside someplace where you won't knock it over. And make sure that you get all that you got on your fingers off. And next we're gonna move on to flocking. So this isn't gonna be, I mean, this is an old gun. I've had it forever and ever. And your method might be a little different here, but the principles will be the same. And I do it over this old drawer, just so if I drop it, I got a way to collect it. That's the big thing with recycling the fiber. You gotta have a way to collect it. I'm just dumping this in there. Nothing technical to this at all. It is just putting it in your applicator. You could throw it on or something like that. The little applicator, probably didn't want that in there. The little applicator they show on their website is not gonna have this big container on it, but it'll work exactly the same. You're just blowing it on there basically. And I know I'm gonna do more of this, so I don't mind if I put extra in here. It's easy to take out. So some of my equipment is like that. I've had it for a long time, and so it's just full. So I'm just tapping that off into this drawer because that's where I'm going to collect it. You'll see in just a second. And from experience, put lids on, put tie wraps on, and this is a real simple setup I'm gonna use here. This is an old drawer. You could use a box, although cardboard boxes are kind of they're not real slick on the inside, so it's hard to get it out of there. But you could use almost anything. Go raid the kitchen cabinets for a cookie tray or something like that. And this is all you do. You just start spraying that in. And there's no way you can screw this up, really. I mean, the worst that can happen is you get it everywhere. I wouldn't recommend you do it in your house, do it in your garage or something like that. And so that is just sticking to everything that was wet. And the thing that's going to keep it from where you don't want it is the masking. It just won't, it'll stick to everything that's wet with adhesive. And I'm taking kind of extra care here to make sure and cover that area on that horizontal edge where the grill sits. And you'll see, like right back in there, there's more than enough in there. But it will shake off. It will come off when it's dry. Only the fiber that's stuck in the adhesive will stay put. The rest you can shake off, put it into however you're collecting it. And there, maybe you can see a little better. And I'm actually going to flip this over to do the other side. The other thing I saw on the site is they have an air-powered, I imagine low air pressure that you would use with a compressor, which if I was doing this a lot, I'd probably look to that. There, maybe you can get an idea. I'm trying to do this in a way that you can see from a camera angle, and I'm hoping, oh boy. I need to adjust I'm looking at my iPhone here because it gives me a monitor to show how this looks. So I think that does it. You know what I might do? Yeah, never mind. Having second thoughts here. I thought maybe I could set up the, I thought this GoPro would be the answer to a whole bunch of questions, but it introduced some issues of motion that I didn't think about. And so really having a handheld camera that someone else is operating or a tripod does some nice things. But you can maybe get an idea. That's not, I'm looking at my monitor to make sure I'm covering. I guess you're getting a good view of it. Maybe now you can get a better idea from a little further away how this looks. For doing an area like this, you almost need some sort of way to pump it on. But that little applicator I saw on their website was inexpensive. I think maybe less than $15, maybe less than 10. And now you can see why I got the drawer here, because it's gonna, you wouldn't have to have this, but I like the idea of taking the excess, just put it back in the bag for the next time. And there'll be more next time here because I'm going to do, of course, those lines and then the design on the side. I guess one other thing maybe I should mention, you probably wouldn't want to do this where it was windy. I did see, I kind of looked at some videos on YouTube to see if people were doing this, and there's plenty of them. Some people recommend a respirator. I have never been sensitive to stuff like this. I mean, I don't think it's benign in terms of any kind of chemical thing, but I suppose if you're real sensitive to atmospheric dust or something, then it might be a good idea to wear a dust mask or respirator. There you saw some excess kind of fall off. And I definitely follow my own advice here and put more than enough on, because it's just easier to do that than trying to guess it just enough, I guess. So you'll see it kind of tumble around in there. And in this case, kind of puff out. Hey, I'm back. it's about 5 days later, and now it's getting to the point where I better get this masking off or it might become part of the cabinet. So the way I do this, and there's a lot of different ways. You could blow it off, the excess off. I usually take a brush like this, a little chip brush, and and I've been editing some of the film before this a little bit. Film, yeah, probably indicates my age a little bit. The video. And, the head cam stuff just isn't working out like I hoped. The problem is the camera faces down in order to get the perspective right from, say, this far away. But when I get closer, it shoots too far down. So I'm messing with a couple other things. I've got a bicycle helmet, and I'm going to modify it to put the camera right here. So hopefully it gets a better, more eye-level perspective instead of actually looking down. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rig up a trolley above me here. You don't see it. I'm pointing up. You can't see it. But there's a big roll-up door right there. So there's 2 rails here, and I'm going to put a little trolley system between those, and hopefully use that both in the shop and maybe even hang a camera from it so that I can get a better angle on some of this stuff. But anyway, back to this. So there's where we ended up. And at this point, whatever's stuck is stuck, whatever is going to get stuck is stuck. And I'm just brushing this off real lightly. I don't want to beat it up. I just want to get any excess off. And I'm letting it fall down into this cavity because it's all going to come out anyway. So I'm just dragging real lightly across all those surfaces. And I fall down in the bottom. And now I'm going to, and this is my canary in the mine thing. That's my little spot that I put earlier. And that's good and dry now. Now my shop stays about 64 degrees, so it's not really warm in here. And it took a couple of days for that to get to the point where I felt it was plenty dry to pull the tape off. So that's what we're going to do now, pull the tape off. And as much as I can, I'm going to let this fall. I'm going to get a garbage can here. I'm going to let this fall into this recess, and that way I can just dump the whole thing out. Maybe I can roll this up and see. So I'm working on the camera thing. I really do want to give people a better view of what I'm doing. But when I'm the subject and the cameraman, so I'll just pull that off. And there you can see what a nice tight clean line that gives. And I don't see any, I think earlier I talked about a little bit of leakage I got, and I was careful when I masked this to make sure and get it tight in the corners. And that seems to have worked. I don't see any places where the blue paint, I'll call it, the adhesive, crept up behind. So now we'll get on to the interior here. At some point, I will take this outside and I'll blow it off with you could do it with an air hose and a blower if you're kind of careful. You don't want to get crazy on stuff, but I'll use a handheld blower. Let me grab it, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is pretty handy around the shop. And that way, any excess in there, I can just blow it off. But I'd just as soon not do it in the shop. It just gets blue dust everywhere. All right, there you can see it unmasked. I hope you can see in there. Black turns out to be something kind of hard to either photograph or things get kind of lost in there. So now, I'm just going to dump that excess into my drawer here. You want to be sure and have a good hold of things here. I would hate to drop this. That's actually not working very well. The other thing you could do would be to use a vacuum with a brush attachment on it and kind of drag over that a little bit. I really didn't get as much of that out of there as I wanted, so I'm going to actually use that vacuum. So this is actually kind of a hyper shop vac I have, and got it on a remote control. Now I'm not sure I'd recommend that unless it was really dry. And like I said, this has been drying for 5 days or so. So there you go. There's kind of the finished part of that. And now I am going to mask off these grooves and then flock them. And I'll use fine line tape again because I want that really crisp line there, and I don't want to risk the adhesive going under the tape and kind of creeping out. Stuff gets everywhere. I mean, that's why I would recommend you to do this not on your kitchen table. And the hard part becomes finding the end of this tape. There we go. So any place you got a visible edge, I think it's a good idea to use fine line tape. It's probably not an absolute necessity, but here I can kind of show you how you can get a straight line. So rather than trying to chase the tape all the way down, it's easier just to kind of pull it over a corner and then just lightly pull on it and sight right down the edge of that groove. And then just drop it in place, and if you've got it where you want it, in this case, just roll that up. Do the same thing on this one. And if you're doing this, you will immediately see what I'm talking about. When I can pull this like this, I can pull it like that, and I can get curves in it just by a light pressure I put going directionally here. So the key is sort of sighting it on this end and dropping it down where you want it there. And that gives you a nice straight line. It's probably a hard thing to describe, but I guarantee if you're doing this, you'll immediately recognize what I'm talking about. So all I'm doing, I'm taking this and twisting this roll just a little bit. Where I overlap that tape, I want to make sure and push that down really tight because again, I don't want the adhesive to creep under the tape. So I'm just going to press on with all this, probably speed through this when I edit. Okay, so there I've got all the stripes. I want to call them stripes. They're really grooves, but I just ran that right along the edge of all the grooves and want to make sure and press that down nice and tight. I was pulling a little bit of tension on that tape, so it should be laying down flat. If you're getting wrinkles or something in your tape, either pulling too tight or pulling one direction or something like that. So experiment. If this is your first time using fine line tape, mess around some. You can't hurt anything. And so now I'm going to put a little bit of tape on the outer edges so I don't have to stay quite so clean with my brushing. And this could be 1-inch tape or 3/4 inch tape or whatever you have. This isn't really creating the line, but it is keeping adhesive off of places you don't want it. Need the glasses again. Press that down good. Now you can see why the yoga mat comes in handy, because I can roll this thing around and not hurt it. And this thing's been curing for a long time. And by the way, this is finished in conversion varnish, so it's tough. It's a really tough finish when it's done. I should say when it's cured. Next thing to do is want a braid down in those grooves or whatever you're doing. Anytime you're painting over finish, you usually want to scratch it up a little bit to give the what's going on top. You want to give it some bite into that surface. And then this is I use these Scuff Pads a lot. This is a red Scotch-Brite, and I just kind of ball it up and push it down into that corner. This is another nice thing about fine line tape, is it's pretty abrasion resistant. I wouldn't call it abrasion proof, but all you're looking to do is scratch that. It's not a heavy duty sanding at all. I just want to make sure that adhesive has something it can bite into, because it's not gonna, some lacquer finishes do what they call burn in, which means they actually melt a little bit of the prior coat. This doesn't do that. Conversion varnish is really, it depends on that mechanical bond as opposed to a burn in. And that doesn't matter what you're putting on top, it's still, the bonding is still the same. And I can tell when I'm looking at that whether it's sanded or not, or scuffed or not. I'm just going to blow that off. And now we start finishing and putting on flocking. Finishing. Let's try that again. We're starting to put the adhesive on, so let me round that stuff up. And they're going to tell you about probably to stir this stuff as opposed to shake it, but actually sometimes store these upside down, so any light stuff actually ends up on the bottom, so when I shake it, it actually mixes things up pretty well. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one that I did on the inside, where I roll the cabinet. And you know what? I'm going to get some gloves. Now we're ready. Where's the patient? Well, doctor, the patient is right in front of you. Good time to look, make sure you got things where you want them. And then put the adhesive on. I know I call this paint a lot because it just seems like paint to me. And it might be just paint. I don't know. I don't have any way to know what the actual ingredients are. But it is very reminiscent of all the oil-based paints that I've painted with. Kind of goopy, kind of sticky, really slow to dry. Again, we're looking for that wet coat, but not, especially in a case like this, you don't want it to run down the sides into the bottom of that any more than is necessary. So, and I don't know if any of it is necessary. So I get it to where it's looking the way I want it, and now I'm going to grab this. If it seems like I'm a little hurried up here, I guess I am. I gotta put something else up here on my workbench, and I wanted to get this coated so it could be drying. There you can probably see why I put that tape on the sides, because I want to be fairly cautious about getting it on the cabinet. It's just stuff I'd end up fixing, and you can also see why I put gloves on. If you got it on your fingers, it's not a huge deal. It's not real toxic, but you'd need paint thinner to get it off very effectively. And paint thinner to clean the brush, of course. So then on that last stroke, I'm just trying to get a nice even coat and then move on to the next side. Make sure I'm not going to leave a fingerprint on here. In a case like this where sort of painting around a corner, if you're not accustomed to using a brush, it's real easy to drag the brush this way and you get a drip that runs off that edge and goes down that direction. So it's best to stroke out as opposed to trying to drag the brush on at the corner. I hope that makes some sense. Maybe watching what I do is more important than listening to what I'm saying. And that last stroke is often referred to as tipping off, where you're just using the very tips of the bristles and just lightly dragging them along. So it's not like you're trying to force the paint around, you're just trying to have an even coat on that. I'm going to do the same thing. Take a little dab of this and put it on my board here so that I can gauge dryness without sticking my finger into the actual thing that I'm finishing. And I could test it on the masked part, but I'm not going to. And so now I'm just eyeballing to make sure I got an even coat, and I can see some places where I don't. And that's right up that side. Kind of the back side of that V. So I cut those as a V. These grooves, they're V-shaped. And I actually cut them on a router table with a V-bit. As hard as you try, or hard as I try, I seem to get that stuff on me. So when I'm flipping this around, I'm being careful to wipe any paint off of any adhesive. Oh, and there's some right there. Fortunately, on this finish, if it's still wet, it comes off pretty easily. I'm just going to put a smidgen more, kind of in the same place. Okay. Now this part, because it's not contained inside of a box like that was, it's a little more messy. So I'm setting up my garbage can and drawer catcher here. Like I said, this could be anything that you can pour out of. A cardboard box, probably not your best bet. Something like a cookie sheet or something that's sort of smooth on the inside that'll allow you to kind of tap it and pour it back into that bag. I suppose you could scoop it back in, or you can just throw it away if you want, but I'm too frugal to do that, I guess. So here we are, back to the same thing. Hardly any way to do this wrong. And I think at first it looks like nothing's really coming out of this, but it is. The fibers are short. I don't know exactly how long, maybe an eighth or a quarter of an inch long, at best, I would think. And it might be because I'm holding this at an angle that I need to reload here. Yeah, it looks like I got plenty in there. See if it does any better this way. Yeah, that actually helps a little bit. I hope. camera can see that. This is where my head cam I thought would do good. And it probably would do okay here, but the problem there is the angle that I have to turn it down when it's on my forehead. And I kind of explained that earlier. Doesn't seem like it would be that big a problem, but now I've used it a little bit, I find out when I go to edit that it really isn't looking where my eyes are all the time. And that gets kind of weird because sometimes the camera is looking off or chopping off some view. If you've been watching this, you'll probably have seen that on an earlier portion where I did the interior of that top. And this works better to do this vertically. It's been a long time since I did the other one, so I don't remember exactly what I did. Sometimes stuff like this just sits around my shop waiting for me to come and do it. I'd be really curious to try the air-powered one, but they're not inexpensive. As I recall, around $60 or $70. So unless you're gonna do a lot of it, it may not be worth it. Just get the hand pump. And once again, you can't, the worst thing you could do here is not get enough flocking on it. Too much is just not a possibility, because excess will just end up coming off or getting on whatever you're using for a pad here. It's actually kind of fun. But that might be just me. I'm going to go around one more time on every surface, and you can see that kind of gets all over the place. I'm just brushing it off into my drawer there. And I can tell you, you can't see it, but down here around my feet there's a pretty good patch of blue. And I got a lot falling into my drawer there, as well as the floor, as well as the workbench top. So you can see the thing that takes the longest in this is for it to dry. And I'm going to stress one more time. Let that adhesive set. Use that little blob as your guide. If it's not set well, when you go to unmask it, it's gonna do what they call string off, which means the paint is not gonna have a crisp cut when you pull it off. It's gonna wanna kind of come with it. And I can imagine that being a real mess. If there's any words of wisdom I can give you from being an old guy, it's don't rush. There's just no rush. Or if there is a rush, then wait until the time when you don't have to. So that's it for now. That'll dry for a day or 3 or 5, and I'll come back and I'll unmask it, and then we'll get on to the patterns on the side. I don't know what to call that, and I'll show you how I do the mask on that, and I'll do it one side at a time. So catch up with you a little later. Oh, there's something really satisfying about unmasking. So here we go. This is the bottom grooves. Pulling the masking tape off. Oh, where did my garbage can go? And then after this, I'm going to do the pattern. I don't know what they call that thing. Flare. It looks kind of flare-like, doesn't it? I'll do that. Oh, by the way, this has been a couple of days like I said, my shop's not really warm, so if you're in a warmer climate, this will probably happen a little bit faster. Sometimes just finding the end of the tape is a challenge. Might even need my glasses. Where are you? There you are. The middle will be the hardest part because it's completely covered in flocking and okay, here we go. And what I'm doing here, I'm just scratching it with my fingernail. And I don't know exactly where the end of the tape is, so I'm just getting my finger under some part of it. And then I can see the other end of this. And there you go. Well, there I go, I guess. Okay, next up I'm going to put that pattern on the side. I'm going to show you how that's done. I'm going to try it with 2 different camera angles. I got my GoPro set up on a tripod, plus this camera, and we'll see how that goes. The head mount thing isn't everything I hoped it would be, but let me get set up for that, and I'll come right back. Okay, now we're going to get started on that design. We'll call it a flare. And this was actually a little bit of a mistake. I gave them the dimensions going the wrong direction. Normally I would have this cut out the same size as the speaker, so or it's the same size of the side, and that would be the same as this perimeter. And actually gave them the dimensions, but they had them going this way and I wanted it this way. So I already know from doing the other one that I need about a 1/2 inch overhang on this top edge, and then I'll center it from side to side. So the easy way to start that, and maybe I should talk about what this is a little bit. So this consists of 3 parts, and the backing is what covers up the adhesive on the mask itself, and then this front part is what keeps it all, what do I want to say, indexed, registered, anyway, what keeps this all together. So first application is the mask onto the side, and then pull this top part off, and all you're left with is the vinyl. And all that so everything can be aligned and kept in position. Hope that makes sense. And this would be the same if you were doing signs or something like that. The difference here is this is low-tack vinyl, which means it doesn't have a whole lot of adhesive to it. And I'm going to do this by feel. I know about what a 1/2 inch feels like. And I'm centering that from side to side, and I'm just putting 1 piece of tape on the bottom to kind of make sure that I've got it all together here. This would be really hard to see, and you know what, I should measure on the other side because it's got a taper on it. I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. And at this point, it doesn't really matter that I'm taking I want the stiffness that backing paper is affording. Okay, so I got it centered from side to side. I got it where I want this way, and I'm going to put another piece of tape on here to keep things. I think when I say in registration, I'm saying what I want to say, but everything at this stage, I think it would be a real easy thing to assume that you could just peel the backing off and stick it on there, and that will surely get a wrinkle or something. So the way I'm showing you here is how you can do this a little at a time and still keep everything where you want it. So don't assume that you can take a big decal or anything like vinyl and stick on a big surface and get it nice and flat. And any sign guy will tell you that. So what I'm doing here is just pulling that back. What I want to do is fold this backing back out of my way. And I want to crease it a little bit. And then I can take this, and I'm just putting a little bit of upwards, well, not upwards, pressure that direction to get things to pull against that tape that I already put on. And I'm just lightly pushing that down with my finger just to make sure everything's still right. And an inch or so on the top is plenty good. And then I can remove this tape. We won't be needing that anymore. And now my sign, the people who cut this for me give me these squeegees every time I get something up there, so I have a collection of them. But essentially you're just working this down a little at a time, and I'm pulling that backing paper off a little at a time, and I want to make sure that I'm getting any air bubbles and I'm following that across, and hopefully you can kind of see how that's unfolding there. This is a little more forgiving than a sign would be because it's low tack, but if one had to remove this, it would be really hard to maintain spacing and the pattern and everything. And the more complex the pattern, the finer the pieces in it are, the harder that's going to be. So I'm just working my way across. And you know me, rushing is never part of my deal. So I'm just making sure that's going down flat all the way across there. And it did. And sometimes it won't, but if you go slow and take your time and kind of be positive in your movements, then... So there you can see the pattern. And actually, I'm hoping that camera shows this up, but I'm going to tip that up just so you can see what that looks like. And then this top paper, I wish I knew the right names for that. I think that bottom stiff paper is the release paper, or maybe this is the release paper. So all I want to leave on there is the vinyl. And if you watch my other videos, you know that I see a lot with my hands. And we can get a hold, and I'm pushing that down all the way around the cabinet. And we can get a hold of this paper and pull it off. Because everything is just as it was. I'm not sure how they do this in the sign shop. It would be interesting to see, but the way they do this, they have a vinyl cutter, but it all comes out just like the files I send them. I've got the back edge of this hanging off my cabinet because that's only been, those grooves at the bottom have only been drying for a couple of days. I don't really want to take the chance of smearing any paint that's not completely dry on there. An oil-based paint, it takes a long time to dry, but it takes even longer when it's in a fairly cool environment. And there you can kind of see it unfolding. Unfolding? I guess it's unfolding. revealing itself. So there I'm left with the vinyl only. And I want to take this squeegee and go around that whole thing and make sure that there are no wrinkles, that there are no edges that are pressed down. And they're easy to see with your eye if you got good light, or you can feel them. But I just want to make sure that's nice and tight. Even though I'm going to pull it off, I want it to be really good, even adhesion to the side of the speaker. Okay, now the Scotch-Brite. Scuff that up a little bit. Again, we're not talking about sanding here, just want to get some scratches. And this vinyl isn't damaged by lightly scuffing over the top of it like that. It's actually pretty resistant to damage at this stage. This kind of vinyl, except with a higher adhesive, the same kind of thing you'd see making signs like real estate signs or anything like that, is done with vinyl like this. Similar to what they wrap cars with, but not quite the same. I just, for sure want to get out towards the ends of these points with the scratches, because I just want to be certain that the oil-based paint has something to grab onto. And I keep calling it paint. It's adhesive. So in some ways I'm actually putting a little pressure on that, once again, to sort of ensure a nice tight seal. And that's good. And we need a rag. Wipe that off, make sure I don't have any debris on there. And I forgot to put it out here, but I'm going to introduce something new into the equation. This thing, this contraption. Some years ago, I think this was kind of a new technique. And the only way to get the things to do it would be to make it yourself. I found one of these on Amazon, and I'll link it in the description. So the theory here is this is electrostatic. And I honestly can't remember where I found the instructions to build this, but this is a transformer. And the powder goes into here. I should say the fibers go into here. And I shake it onto the surface. And the theory, and I'll run also a piece of wire up onto the paint, the adhesive here. And the theory is that aligns the fibers so they don't lay down because of the static that's being created. And it's really light. I mean, there's nothing here that could hurt you. Well, I guess there's a way to hurt yourself doing almost anything, but it's not dangerous. I mean, and so what it does theoretically is to align the fibers so that they stand up. Now, my understanding is this was first done looking for a grass effect on model railroads of all things. They want the grass to look realistic, so it's standing up, not laying down. And there may have been other applications. This is not a necessity. You could do this just like I was doing the rest of the cabinet, but I thought I'd show this just as a kind of a side. In fact, some parts of the cabinet in here would be really difficult to do with something like this because you need to be above it, and I'm just tapping it around like that. And so let me gather some more stuff up here and we'll come back. What I've done here is I have taped a piece of wire on here, and I'll actually paint over the end of that wire. I want a little bit of a conductor from the paint to this alligator clip. And so the next thing we'll do, I've already scratched that up, so we'll apply the adhesive, and then I'll go on to the application of the fiber. But I'm going to go ahead and load this right now. So this is the same as the other thing. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You just need to get it in there. And I've never used the commercial version of this, so I don't know how it compares. But it looks to be a very similar idea. The whole thing is about getting static into those fibers, and I'm not sure I really understand it all. And it looks like my whole apparatus could use a little repair here. Here's this wire. The wire is actually connected to this screen, which my understanding is that imparts the static charge as the fibers leave. So I'm just pushing that through the screen, locking that down, set that aside, and probably a good idea to bundle this up. I've never spilled one of these, but I can imagine it being a real mess. So I'll remember the rubber gloves this time. Technically, these aren't rubber. These are nitrile gloves, which are more resistant to solvents, as I understand it. And you get to watch me blow up my glove now. What fun, huh? Oh, paintbrush, where did you go? See how organized I am? There's a fair amount to organize here. I mean, if I were just doing this, here I've got 2 cameras running, and I'm thinking, oh, do it right, because I won't get a second chance. Well, I might get a second chance on this one because I got the other side to do, but same thing on the paint. Want to get it on there, don't want to slop it all over the place. And remember, every place you put paint, the fibers are going to stick. So spreading it over this whole thing will just be a waste of fiber, because when we pull this off, all that's going to get removed. And I think I might have said this earlier. This brush is actually quite a bit bigger than it needs to be. A 1-inch brush, that's a 1.5-inch brush. Would be plenty good. So I'm trying to somewhat confine that to the design, but it's not a necessity. It's just that you'll lose some fiber. It strikes me as one of those things. Now here I'm actually applying paint right there to the end of that wire, because I want that to be a good contact through there. And just making sure I got everything covered. If you've been watching throughout this whole thing, you saw me talk about wetting the surface, and that's what I'm doing. I'm making sure I've got adhesive everywhere I want it, and that's an even coat. And once I've done that, and I got enough on there, then I can tip off. And before I put the flocking on, I want to make sure there's no areas where I need more, and that it's pretty even. This may not be obvious from the camera perspective, but I'm just letting the weight of that brush drag along there and distribute that adhesive. Alrighty. There's that part done. Take the time to put the lid on. I don't know if you can hear that. I'm using my phone as a monitor for the GoPro, and somebody's calling me. So that's my phone buzzing that you hear right there. And now we move on to application. And what I'm going to do is, they'll give up eventually. I'm going to hook this wire to that. And I may, you know, it's probably not worth it. Like I said, some of this stuff is pretty old. So when I made this, I'm not sure there was even a commercial way to do this. But I have an on-off switch up here. And that runs a little current into this wire and into this screen. And then it's just a matter of applying it like this. And whoever it is that's calling is now calling me back. I don't know if that's obvious. I'm going to pull this out of the way so maybe one camera will pick it up. So see how that's being attracted to that wire? So that it is doing, there is static electricity running through this whole setup. And like I've said before, I don't think there's a wrong way to do this. If you put too much on, no big deal. Because I'm not blowing it around, it's somewhat controlled, so I can kind of just keep it in the areas that I want. And I'm actually running out of stuff in my applicator. We'll call it an applicator. So I'm gonna put another dose in that. This is probably one of those cases where if I put too much on there, it's no big deal. If I don't get enough, well, that could be a little bit of a problem. And I'll recycle what I don't use here. Or at least most of it. Almost done. Well, almost done, ready for it to wait. And I actually have a switch on top here that turns this on. It's been so long since I made this thing, I don't remember a lot about it. I think I probably made it from some instructions in a magazine, maybe. There was no YouTube when I made this thing. Okay, and call that good. That's going to sit for a day or two, and I would suggest that you do this someplace where you don't have to move it around much, because it's best just to leave things alone. And if I seems like I'm harping on that, it's one of those processes that's just, rushing it probably is not going to be a good idea. Let's put it that way. So next up, you'll see me pull the mask off and we'll do the other side. So I'll catch up with you pretty soon. Hello again. Back in the saddle. And this has been sitting for 2 or 3 days. And basically I'm going to do the same thing all over again. So the only thing that's going to change is I'm going to use these more yoga mats. And when I flip this over, I don't want to rest it on this design. I want to rest it on the painted parts of the cabinet. So what I'm going to do now is find a brush. Bear with me. And I'm just going to kind of push this off, and my drawer is down here. my collection drawer. And there's a couple ways I could do this. I could tip it up, but I thought I'd just do it this way. And then I'm going to use my hyper vacuum to get the rest of it off. You can see that's sticking where the adhesive was. And I think that's about as far down the recycling road as I'm going to go. So next we use the hyper vac. You can't see it, but trust me, it's a hyper vac. That should get the inside of my vacuum nice and blue. And now comes the fun part, the unmasking. Well, maybe I should do this. I'm running a couple different cameras here. We'll see if that works out. So depending on what you're looking at right now, you'll know whether it worked or not. And there you can see the vinyl's actually tearing a little bit, not a big deal. At some point I'll just have to get a hold of that and pull it off. This works just like masking tape in this regard, although it's more like fine line tape because it's vinyl as opposed to, I think most masking tape is actually paper based. I have to tell you, this is really satisfying, this part of it, because you really start to see, well, you do see what all the effort was for. I can think of a lot of places where this could be used, and I showed some examples here, but I would say if one was to use your imagination, you could do all sorts of things. You could use this inside of a waveguide. You could use it a lot of different ways. So there it is. And I'm going to check just to make sure I got my measurement right. And yes, I did. So there it is. Well, maybe that camera sees it. I don't know. We'll see once I get it all edited. I'm doing things I've never done before. One more quick vacuum. And I should tell you, that's been drying for 3 or 4 days. So the vacuum part of it, I don't think I'd do that if it were real fresh. I'm making sure that I'm waiting a long time between to do that. And there's still a little residue on there. I'm not even going to worry about that at this point. I think it's stuck on there from static electricity. So now I'm going to use these pads, and I just made, these are cutouts from something or another, and I just glued some yoga mats on them. And flip this over and do exactly the same thing I did on the other side. Get those placed. So I want these placed where they're not on the pattern. Probably should have done this on the other side. Oh, you guys get to see this cord running in my mic. And I can tip that down and get those right out at the corners. Who knew there were so many uses for yoga mats? Okay, give that a good wipe down with a not so clean cloth, it seems like. Back with my gloves. I'm too early. Let's try that again. So now, wash, rinse, repeat, same thing all over again. If you watched the first go around of this is just going to be a repeat. I'm going to speed through it. I know this video is going to be a whopper because I've already done some editing on it. So I'll just blast through it, and I'll put a photo or a little video at the end showing the finished item. Now gloves.